This is the Brent Model C pottery wheel. We currently use 5 of these. In the 20 years that we've been using the wheels, we've had them serviced once. The place that we buy clay at, Portland Pottery South in Braintree, has a service technician who will come out and look at things like pottery wheels or your kiln if there is any issues. In this particular wheel right now, it's on. We'll look at the controller. So we have, of course, on and off. So it's on now. If you are a right-handed person, of course, you would go up to the forward position. I press the pedal, so turned on, turn it off. Now, if you were right-handed, if you're left-handed, sorry, you go down to reverse and it spins the wheel in the reverse, or we'll say clockwise position. So for myself, for the demonstration, I'm gonna move it up to the forward position. All right, so we're gonna set up our wheel kind of for a quick demo. So as of right now, we need a couple things. So of course, we have these guards that we put on the wheel to block out any clay that's going to splash around. So there's a little lip and it slides in. You go around, get that in there. Then on this one, we have the 2 tabs. So we bring this under and just snap it in. From there, we'll have our bucket of water. Now it's nice when you have a bucket if you have a sharp edge, because when you clean your hand, you can wipe your hand or scrape it onto the edge. So if you buy a bucket, say from Home Depot, that have these rounded edges, they don't work as well. So this sharp edge is nice. The next thing we need is a sponge. Usually use a rib tool, one of these little wooden tools, and we'll use a needle tool so we can measure the depth of our clay. So we'll put that in there and we'll move these aside. So we have a wedge ball of clay, and one of the things I usually like to point out to the students is on the wheel there's concentric rings. So our goal is we don't really need the wheel head wet yet, so what we're going to do is we have our wedge ball of clay and we want to try to center this. So usually we kind of just bring it over and we pop it right down. You can pat it. Now if I turn on the wheel for a second, I can kind of quickly see if it's centered or not. Of course it's not centered, but it's not bad. So using the rings, I was able to, get it to roughly the position. Now the wheel's on, the pedal, I have it down all the way. So I'm gonna turn that off for a sec. I'm gonna take my sponge in my hand and just add a little bit of water because I want my hands to be thoroughly wet so that there's no friction. Now, this part of your hand is gonna ride on the wheel. So you're gonna have a nice pressure there. As I move into the clay, I'm going to do what's called coning. I'm going to bring my hand in. The clay is going to want to push my hand like this. So I tell the students, when you're using the clay, you don't let the clay push you around. It's easier said than done. But I also use my forearm and my elbow, and I put my elbow into my thigh, and I use my forearm and I ride it on top of the lip of the bowl. So I'm pressing down in pretty much almost 3 points of contact. The wheel head, the edge of the shroud here, and then of course my thigh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to apply pressure and get the clay to center so it's not going to move back and forth. So we got to make sure there's plenty of water. Some people will hold a sponge on their hand and do that and allow enough water to go down. I'm just going to move that aside. Usually in the beginning I don't have students do that because it becomes a little bit too cumbersome. So I'm going to put the wheel on full speed and then I'm going to just move in. So you can see it's moving my hand a little bit. And then as I move in, I can kind of cone the clay up. And by coning it, I'm also it's helping center it a little bit. So I'm going in. And then what I'm going to do is at a certain point, I'm going to bring the clay back down. So I use my other hand, and I'm bringing the clay back down. Now, if you remember, when I was kneading the clay earlier, at least I think I showed you, the clay that I'm using is pretty soft, meaning that sometimes when you get the clay and you take it off the block, from the box that you buy it from, the moisture content might be a little bit stiff. So as you get used to working on the pottery wheel, you'll get used to how dense the clay should be. So if the clay is too stiff, then of course, it can be a little harder to center your clay. At this point, that's not bad. Remember what I was saying about the sharp edge of the bucket? So your hands can get a little muddy. So I can just do this on the bucket and very quickly wipe my hands off and clean things. I usually tell the students, if things are getting too mucky, just turn the wheel off, just relax, take your sponge, just wipe your hands off, get everything clean, get back to normal where you want to be. Clay's not going anywhere. You can just stop at any time, turn the wheel off, and you're perfectly fine to keep going. So at this point, when we're working with the clay, so we got it pretty much centered. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drill into it. So, I'll start my thumbs, and I'm going to press down into the clay, and I'm going to move down into the piece. Remember, the moisture is important. We don't want excessive friction on the clay. We don't want it to rip off the wheel. The other thing I usually tell the students is sometimes it might take 20 tries to even get this to center right. Because most of the time when they're learning to center anything, the clay is pushing them around and it's moving like this, and it might even spin and fly off the wheel. It's happened many times. So I'm going to turn the wheel off. Actually, let me clean something up there for a minute. So then from there I explain the needle tool. So the needle tool, we want to see how thick is this base. So if I press this down into the clay like that, slide my thumb to the very bottom, and I do this, so that base right now is about 3/8 of an inch. So that's sufficient. That's not too bad. Sometimes, with a student work, you could be up to an inch thick. So you just say, okay, drill a little bit more. Put this aside out there, and we can go back to what we're doing. Now, to draw the sides up, of course, it's just trial and error. I'm going to lightly pinch, and I'm going to kind of move my fingers up. Now, of course, nowadays with YouTube, as you know, there's so many videos out there that are excellent of how people use and work with the wheel. So with the students, we're not doing anything too elaborate in the beginning. We're just trying to first learn how to center the clay, and then from there to figure out, how do you draw the clay up and actually make something that might be just that you're happy with, I should say. Now, sometimes we even do this. So I'm going to turn the wheel off. If the top edge gets a little gooky like that, we also use our needle tool as a little cutter. So I might turn this back on. I take my tool, and I'm just going to hold it in one position, and I'm going to maybe trim off that top edge quickly. So this little excess piece, it can be thrown back into my recycle bucket, and we'll re-wedge that clay.
Good morning, faculty and students. It is Thursday, December 23rd.
Now that we've actually, did a demo piece here, what we can do is maybe we'll trim the bottom a little bit. So we'll kind of go in. If you notice the base, what I'll usually show students is the base right here can be a little thick. So we can use two different tools here. We have a rib tool, and then we have this cutoff tool. So first thing you want to do is make sure that both tools are damp. And then what I can do is, turning the wheel on, I can take the wood tool and I can just go in and I can trim the bottom here a little bit, smooth that out. Once again, all excess clay we usually put in one spot so it can be placed back into the bucket. I'm going to take my rib tool, turn that back on, just clean that up a little bit, make a little bit more of an undercut into the base. Once again, always make sure that the wheel is turned on before you touch any tool to the piece or your hands. So we'll trim in a little bit here, just kind of cut that a little bit back. And then, once again, my excess clay, I'll just move this aside and place it in that little spot over there. I think that's enough for what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is just turn the wheel back on, take a little bit of water, and maybe just smooth my edge out a little bit. So for our demo piece, this is probably sufficient. Now we're going to talk about taking the piece off of the wheel head. So to take the piece off of the wheel head, what we're going to do is we're going to first take our sponge, maybe turn the wheel on a little bit, and just kind of maybe clean the top of the wheel a little bit. Just get some of that excess of material out of there. So that's pretty clean. What I'm going to do next, there are a number of different ways or methods to take an object off of the wheel head. I'm just going to show you one. You'll probably find a way that you feel is maybe more efficient or more comfortable for you. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop off this front shroud. So I'm going to move this aside. What I have is I have two things. I have this little plastic tray and I have this cutting wheel. So what I'm going to do is place that there, and I have a cutting wire. I'm going to take a little bit of water. I'm going to flood the wheel with some water, clean water, just from my bucket. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my piece of plastic, and I'm also going to wet a portion of it, just the front section here, and I'll place this down. Now, wrapping the wire around my fingers and using my thumbs, I'm going to go like this, and I'm just going to press it down close to the wheel head, and I just pass under the piece maybe 2 times. Now with my pinkies, I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm going to try to push the object or float it over onto this pool of water. Once it's on that pool of water, it floats around pretty well. So I'll bring it to the edge, and I'm just going to slide it right over onto my plastic tray, just like that. So this piece right now is ready to put aside and let it dry, and then we can trim the bottom.